June and the Knight's Castle. Time-traveling short romance story. Written by Misha Quinn, 2024. All rights reserved. Copyright Misha Quinn, 2024. June and the Knight's Castle. June entered the medieval castle. The huge lancet windows, unpretentiously decorated with colored designs made of multicolored stained glass, let in little light into this gloomy hall. The girl trod carefully on the stone slabs of the floor, which had been polished by time, or rather by the feet of people who had walked on it for many centuries. The vaulted ceiling of this room pressed down on her, as if many centuries of history of this place had been piled on top. June had gone on a tour of this castle famous for its strange stories. Reluctantly, her friends from the institute where she was studying engineering had called her. June was not superstitious or timid, but now she could only think of dark stories that her friends had told her before her visit to the castle. One story was that the locals were afraid even to pass near this castle at night, because there were rumors that unusual lights, not like normal electric lights, glowed in its windows at night, which, of course, were equipped with all the rooms of this building. When the girls came to the castle's gates, the guide, an elderly woman, told the story of its construction. June did not want to listen to it, so she slowly stepped aside from the tour and texted her friends that she would go for a walk by herself. Then she went on her own journey around the castle. Turning from the castle's main hall into some even darker rooms, June stopped, amazed at what she saw. In this room, behind the tightly locked glass of a display case, were knights' armor and weapons, pikes, swords, and crossbows. June was not usually interested in martial arts, but she wanted to look at it all closer here. She came so close to the display case that her breath melted and disappeared on the glass in a light cloud of vapor. The girl knew that centuries ago people were, on average, much shorter in stature than her contemporaries. This was also confirmed by the armor of various knights in this museum, but one knight's armor caught her attention. This armor differed from the others. The blue steel was decorated with skillful filigree and chasing, depicting dragons and the knight plunging them to the ground. June noticed that this armor was the most complete. It had everything in place: breastplates and the abdomen, arms, and legs. Not all other armor patterns were full, which set this set apart. And what also set it apart was that its wearer was clearly very tall, even by the standards of modern times. June stood by this knight's armor, leaning against the glass with her forehead and palms resting against it. Her eyes were covered, and a strand of dark, wavy hair fell over her face. Suddenly, the silence of the gloomy hall was broken by a sound. June turned around and saw no one. She moved away from the glass and suddenly realized that no armor was behind it. The girl froze, but somehow, there was no fear in her soul. She was waiting for something unusual that she could never feel in her ordinary life. Her whole being was ready to accept the surprises of this day in this castle. There was another rustle behind her back. June turned around once more and peered into the corner of the dark hall. There was a glint of metal in the corner, which she had not considered upon entering here. The outline of this metal resembled the figure of a man sitting down and resting one hand on his chin, with the other resting powerlessly on his knee. The head of this man in armor was lowered. He was not looking at June. This man, whose face was covered by the metal visor of the knight's helmet, was looking somewhere in the distance through the castle wall. As if mesmerized, June pressed her lips together and stepped towards this man. There were no thoughts in her mind about what she intended to do or say. The girl just walked towards this knight, and did not know what she would do next. He slowly raised his head when she walked up to the knight. His eyes glittered in the slits of the knight's helmet, dark, with very white whites of his eyes. The long, dark lashes seemed to belong to the beautiful young man. The man, and it was a man, looked at June questioningly and sadly. She thought he was unhappy, and she was bothering him. The girl stopped right in front of the knight and asked in almost a whisper, "Hello, my name is June, and you are?" The knight straightened his back, and his armor rattled, moving to follow him. June could see he did not want to answer her, but her curiosity overcame her apprehension and caution, and she continued the conversation. "I understand you are wearing this armor for some special occasion. Are you part of a performance to be given to our group of castle visitors?" The knight straightened up even more and placed one hand on his knee and rested it on it, answering, "Me, I'm not involved in anything else." The man's voice was muffled and low, like something was squeezing his chest. June leaned toward him, trying to hear the answer. The knight made the same movement toward her, and their lips met. The kiss was not intentional. It was just a touch of lips and nothing more. June was sure of this, and that was why she was not embarrassed. It was just a misunderstanding, that was all. She would never try to touch a strange man, even alone in the dark hall of an ancient castle. It was all unreal. The knight suddenly stood beside her, holding her forearms with both hands. His armor was like a mountain of metal, but from the slits of his helmet, June could feel the man's hot breath, and hear his heart beating. Yes, that was right, she could hear it. The girl did not recognize that her own heart was pounding in her temples, as if she had just escaped a hurricane. But the hurricane had caught up with her. June raised her head and ran her hand over the stranger's iron mask. Suddenly, he removed it with a single tug, and long, dark, wavy hair spread across the knight's shoulders. The stranger's nose was hunched, and his face was clean-shaven. Sharp, wide cheekbones gave it an angular appearance, but the dark eyes, even under the mask, struck June like fire. The knight's lips were beautifully contoured, and one of them was parted by a jagged scar. "I can see that you need protection," he said again in a muffled voice. How does he know that? June thought in panic. It's not like I've told anyone anything or complained. In truth, June needed protection. She had recently lost her father, who had passed away after a sudden serious illness. The feeling of emptiness was simply unspeakable. June could not be in the company of boys, even if they were just friends or classmates. Everything about them reminded her of her father. She knew that this longing would pass with time, but for now, the pain was too intense. The girl cried. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She wiped them away with her fingers, but suddenly, she felt the fingers of this stranger touch her cheek. He gently ran his hand over her cheek, and suddenly, there was no trace of June's tears. Something had happened to her. She looked at her hands, they were adorned with gemstone rings. June lowered her gaze and realized she was not wearing her usual jeans and tank top with sneakers. Instead, she wore a dress made of weightless fabric, and intricately embroidered with gold threads. The dress's bodice was tied with a wide braid, and decorated with precious stones. June looked around in amazement, and in the window, behind which were the rest of the knight's armor, she saw the reflection of a medieval beauty, standing in the arms of a knight who towered over her by almost a head. The girl turned to her stranger and realized that all she saw in the reflection was her view, it was her reality. June rested her hands lightly on the armor on the knight's chest, and looked into his eyes testingly. She did not marvel. She somehow took what had just happened to her for granted. Her whole being had been waiting for something like this. Perhaps all her life reading historical novels, June had been waiting for something like this. The knight touched her face with his palm again. He ran his index finger across her forehead, down her cheek, and felt her lips. June did not move or say anything. She stood before him, immersed in the trance of a fresh experience. This extraordinary moment belonged to her and her alone. She did not need to tell anyone about what she was just experiencing. Why? No one would understand, and she would lose this feeling of magic and this feeling of security, which suddenly covered her like a bell. From under, no sound penetrated outside, except for the beating of the hearts of the two of them with the night in breathing. The girl lost track of time. As she stood before the night, it was as if she were dreaming a dream come true. The stranger looked into her eyes and said nothing. They were now connected by a feeling of unity. Some shared a secret about which nothing should be said aloud. At last the knight spoke, taking his hands off June. "That's it, my time is up." He said it sadly. June suddenly realized she did not want to return to her old world. She knew that now this magic would end, and she would sink into her everyday life, and this wonderful moment would never happen again. The girl demandingly replied, "But I don't want to." "What don't you want?" asked the knight. In his eyes, he read a question and some wild hope for something June did not understand. "What don't you want?" he asked again. June lowered her head and answered, "I don't want to leave here." The knight did not accept this answer. Oh, interrogated her even more, demanding, "So, what exactly don't you want?" June looked up at him and answered, slowly enunciating the words, I don't want you to disappear. I mean, you're going to disappear now, aren't you? After all, this is all a dream or some sort of obsession. That's not how life works." The knight was silent. It was as if he was pondering the meaning of her words. Finally, he spoke. "You got it right. This moment of your life is special. I never thought about the fact that I could once again." He stopped talking. June moved closer and touched her hand to his hair at his temple. "What didn't you think about? About someone seeing you here?" The knight nodded silently. "No one usually sees me. I come here from another time and spend time in the future. It gives me strength to fight for justice, for I know what my country will come to centuries from now, after I have lived my life." It was then that June understood the meaning of his words. She realized she had somehow tied her life to a man from the past. But then, was she his future? After all, one could say that, could not one? June resolutely looked into the knight's eyes, saying, "Then we should get to know each other better. Even if we part forever, I will remember you and your name. Let's start again. My name is June. What's yours?" The knight looked down at her and simply answered, "My name is No. What my name is in my time is not important to you. Just call me Galil." June, moving her lips weakly, mouthed his name to herself, "Galil, Galil." The knight looked at her almost mockingly, and suddenly pulled out a handkerchief from somewhere in his armor. The unusual handkerchief was pure white, artfully tied around the edges with the finest lace. On it were embroidered initials GG. Gallo held out his handkerchief to the girl without saying another word. June took his gift and spread the fabric of the handkerchief with her fingers. Suddenly, an image of a castle appeared in the center of the handkerchief. Around the walls, where knights rode on massive horses covered with armor, and waved giant swords, beautiful ladies watched this spectacle from the castle wall, waving identical white handkerchiefs at their knights. "I have hardly any time left. I must leave you," said Gallo quietly. June tore her gaze away from the handkerchief and grabbed the knight's forearm, or rather, just hooked her fingers into it and said passionately, "No, no, wait. I don't want to." The girl fell silent in confusion, hesitant to say aloud what she was thinking. Gallo realized what she wanted to say and continued the sentence at her, "Come along with me. Is that what you want?" "Yes," she answered quietly, releasing his hand and stepping away from the knight. "This is exactly what I want. For the first time in my life, I know what I want," she exclaimed passionately, looking defiantly at the knight. I want to go with you into your world and see if I belong to my world or yours, and I feel like next to you. You're not wrong. Next to me you will be protected, be sure of that. I've never given my word of allegiance to anyone before, so... A pledge of allegiance? You mean to a woman? Galil smiled softly and replied, yes, you got it right again. I have not given my word of allegiance to any woman yet, so what we just had between us. Does it mean something to you that I'm here and saw you? Yes, it means a lot. No one has ever seen me once in this castle, though I appear here both day and night. People only see the light of the moon reflecting off my armor as I walk the corridors of the castle. No one has ever seen me up close before the way you have, and that means you have everything you need for me to give you my word of allegiance. June smiled back at him and breathed, women you have, do they give a man their word of fidelity too? Galil looked at her in amazement. Do women in your world desire that, not just men? You could hear the amazement in his voice. Yes, they do. At least I intend to do so, June replied, taking the knight's hand. His armor covered the back of her palm, and the metal tinged the heat of Galil's skin with its coldness. The knight surrendered June's palm quickly and replied, yes, now I understand why fate brought me together with you. This is exactly the woman I dreamed of, and that's why none of my contemporaries appealed to me, and only you could show me what I've been looking for all this time. June faded her gaze, her cheeks turning pink with embarrassment. The girl realized she liked Galil, and that it was not his timing, but as that attracted her with such force that she could not resist hugging the knight. June's cheek touched the cold metal of the armor on Galil's chest. With her other arm, she put it around his waist. The knight took a deep breath and embraced her with both arms as gently as if he were holding a porcelain doll in his arms. The two stood in the dark hall of the ancient castle. They did not notice people walking around them, looking intently at the knight's armor and the window. One piece of armor was still missing, but the visitors thought it was simply taken away for restoration, as often happens in museums, and just forgot to put a note about it for museum visitors. Everything happens in life, and love comes from another time. Everything just coincides in such a way that you realize that this is it, your destiny, and it was now or never. June decided. She chose a world where she had a protector, her knight, Galil. She chose a world where everything was just the way she liked it, and where she found her love. Many months passed, modern life bustled around the castle, excursions took place, and airplanes flew over the castle. No one saw strange night lights in the castle anymore. People stopped worrying about where one of the female students had gone. Apparently, she just returned home because that was the note June left to her friends. June told her relatives that she had found her love and told them this love was calling her far away. June promised to return to her family someday. Still, for now the girl was wholly absorbed in her relationship with a prominent man who always accompanied her on visiting home. The manners of June's lover were old-fashioned, and he spoke some words strangely, but his looks and the way the lovers looked at each other left no doubt, for June was happy with her knight, Galil. The end.